I believe the time of enlightenment has come to the African people. I believe it's time for the Africans to wake up. That was why I made a video recently and I titled it the reasons why Africans die unnecessarily, the reasons why Africans die. Like I said before, we've moved away from our roots. The Africans has moved away from their roots. We've been able to abandon the ways of our ancestors, the ways the early Africans lived on it. That is one of the reasons why we have the high mortality rate, that we've been recording in the African soil, the African continent today. So you would agree with me that not until the Westerners arrived, to Africa, we've never had that high mortality rate. We've never had that unnecessary death rate, in the African continent. Our grandfathers, as and then our ancestors, to say we are living very healthy. They aged healthy. When I mean age healthy, I mean from the age of 60 to 90 years of age. They didn't encounter unnecessary health challenges or sicknesses. They lived healthy while aging. They stayed very fit while aging. Their bones were still very strong, and they were working very well and healthy. They didn't use any unnecessary, walking stick. Some few actually did, but in most cases we had our African people, our African ancestors. They lived very fit, strong, and healthy whilst they aged. So it was until the Westerners came to the African continent that was when we started recording high mortality rate and all of that. For example, when they first, arrived, the Gold Coast, known as Ghana today, we have the Sierra Leone, we have Gambia, so these were the first places they visited, and we have the Uda, which is known as, I think, Benin Republic, today. So they started living at the tropical areas. When the Westerners arrived, they started living at the tropical areas, and from there they started recording high mortality rates, and they started saying that the African soil had what we call the falciparum, malaria, and the yellow fever. But up until then, the 16th to 17th century, when they arrived, we never heard on anything like the malaria, the deadly malaria, or the yellow fever. I don't know if we heard. Someone should please educate me, let me know. It was until the Europeans came into the African continent, to the African soil, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Gambia, Uda, that was when we started hearing the falciparum, malaria, the yellow fever that was killing them at the tropical areas they resided. They were, I think, for my own logical reasoning, I think the Westerners brought in these diseases to African soil. They brought in these diseases we are seeing today that has been killing the Africans. That is my take. I think basically the Westerners took the African continent as an experiment soil, or experiment continent, where they could just come and drop off things to start experimenting with us. That is my take, and that is what I see that is happening today in today's world. That is what I see. That is my take. Now, let's proceed. I could doing my research within this week, I saw that when the Europeans arrived, they started recording high mortality rate in all of these places: Ghana, Sierra Leone, Gambia. I think Ghana had one of the most high mortality rates as at then. I think it was recorded from 30 to 40% mortality rate for the Westerners initially. Do you get? For the Westerners, that was what they were recording. But as at then, when the Europeans arrived to the African soil, to the African continent, one of the most funny thing is that they regarded Africa as the white man's grave initially. The white man's grave. Wow, the white man's grave. That was what they called Africans. That was what they called our soil, the white man's grave. It was funny. I was just searching through history, and when you begin to try to know your history, know your existence as a nation or as a continent, it's a good thing for everyone to start researching for these histories, to know how the Africans were treated, how Africans lived, and how we've been living and up until now. So they were recording 40% of mortality rate in Ghana, 30 to 40% in Ghana. They were recording in Sierra Leone, Senegal, and Gambia was about, I think, 15 to 20% and stuff like that. So they had it that they were saying that those who came, they were saying that the Westerners who arrived early in the African continent, that they died, they encounter more mortality rate, that they die faster than those who have stayed longer, who have lived longer in the African soil. So that means they are trying to say that those who arrived like 6 months, who have stayed in the African soil 6 months, that they had more high, immune to stay, to live, to combat the yellow fever and the falciparum malaria that was in existence then. So they are trying to say that they are used to the African weather and all of that. So they were able to cope and live. But those who arrived early enough, those who just arrived, they die more than those who have been there, who have been here, before those who are arriving. Do you get? So that is what they say. So that's one thing. Many need to realize that these Westerners, they brought in these sicknesses, they brought in these diseases to the African soil. Yes, that is one thing I see in this. It's either they contracted these diseases through the sea voyage when they were coming, they are all seafarers. When they were coming, they contracted these diseases through the seas they passed through in getting to the African continent, because basically they have sailed to other continents, they have sailed to other nations. They say they have sailed to West Indies, they said, they've been to, I think they said to, yes, Wales and all of that. So basically they have sailed to all of these continents. So why coming to the African soil? They brought in these sicknesses, but they started claiming that the African soil had this yellow fever and malaria that was killing them. Now they said the first outbreak was in Senegal and Gambia. To be correct, they said the first outbreak of these diseases happened in Senegal and Gambia in 1778. Now listen to this, 1778, that was what it was dated. So they are claiming that the Africans or Africa, that yellow fever and the malaria, the falciparum malaria, broke out in Africa, that it was originated from the African soil. Then now they are saying again that the first recorded outbreak happened in West Indies in the year 1640s. So can you compare 1640s? So it first happened in West Indies 1640s, then to 1778. Can you imagine that? But they are claiming that the African soil had this yellow fever and the falciparum malaria that was killing them. So basically, these Westerners brought in these sicknesses and diseases to the African soil. They brought in these diseases and sicknesses to the African soil. That is my take. That is my take on this. So now, moving forward, why am I saying this? Why am I going back to history, trying to, bring in a context details, things that happened for everyone here to, see and hear of these histories? It is because I believe that there is a potential in Africa, that the African soil holds greatly to natural resources that could actually bring civilization, the true civilization that Africans want or need in Africa. Yes, the African people owns the world. We own this world. We have these raw materials that has been transferred, that has been moved to the Western world, that has developed the Western people today. These raw materials were all gotten from African soil. These raw materials, they were all gotten from the African soil. Quote me anyway. They were all gotten from the African soil. And it is until the Africans, it is we ourselves, until we start realizing and recognizing that we have these raw materials that could possibly develop the African people, that can possibly make us one of the greatest continents that the world has ever seen. That is when the true civilization that we all seek for will begin to flourish, and will begin to have it. So now in the whole of these things, all of these things has happened in Africa, and they brought in these, sicknesses and diseases and all of this, just because. And one thing I said in my last video was that our ancestors, the early Africans, didn't bother to, develop when it comes to, they didn't bother to develop more when it comes to scientific medicine, because why? We weren't dying unnecessarily. The early Africans, they were living very healthy, aging fit, and living up to the expected age that they needed to live before they die. So that was the reason why they didn't bother to start developing what we call the scientific medicine, the orthodox medicine. They didn't care about that. So you can agree with me that the Westerners and the Europeans, they have been able to develop more when it comes to the scientific medicine, because why? They were all sicklers. They were all dying of sicknesses and diseases. That was the reason why they funded more. That was the reason why they paid more attention to their scientific medicine. Yes. And now, because they have brought these diseases to the African soil due to diffusion, due to infiltration, they've brought this disease to the African people, to the African continent. That is why now we felt like we were lacking, that we felt like we've delayed ourselves from developing into the scientific medicine. But that is not true. It was because now that the Westerners and the Europeans have brought this disease and sickness to the Africans, so that is why we are trying to look towards that direction. If not for the fact, for history's sake, we didn't care or bother to start developing when it comes to scientific medicine, because we never needed it. The African people never needed it. We are cool and okay with our natural herbs, with our natural medicine. We are living very healthy. We didn't eat preserved food. We are eating rightly and aging very well. We are eating rightly and aging very well. We are eating rightly and aging very well. So we never needed the scientific medicine. You see? So now this Western culture has infiltrated us, and due to diffusion and civilization, we've been able to, bring in all sorts of sicknesses to the African people, all sorts of, diseases to the African people. So that is why now it seems as if the Westerners and the Europeans are doing us good by funding us. That's why you can see the president of United States of America would say that he has taken away the what is it called, the funding for HIV for the African people. Why? Because we've succeeded in bringing these sicknesses and diseases to the African soil that has in turn killed most of the African people, reducing our lives unnecessarily. They've succeeded. So what are we supposed to start doing now as an Africans? What are we supposed to start doing? We need to start thinking. We need to start making use of our brains to know that we could actually become one of the greatest continents in the world. Yeah, it is possible, and it is very possible when we start looking back, retracing our steps. That's why I always say there's a need for a course correction. There is a need for a course correction for the African people. We have all of the raw materials we need. We have all the raw materials we need in the African soil, and those raw materials can actually do wonders. Whereas those raw materials, with them, we can actually become one of the greatest continents. We have whatever we need. It is here in Africa. It is here with us. It is here with us in Africa. How did the Chinese men today, how did China become one of the greatest today when it comes to technology, when it comes to buildings, when it comes to development? You think those doors that the Chinese you import from China, you say is a bulletproof door, and where do you think they get the raw materials from? It was from the African soil. Most of these raw materials are gotten from the African soil, but they will never tell you. But kudos to China anyway. Kudos to them, because they've been able to, manage to produce, go into production to develop their continent, their nation. They've managed to develop their nation. Kudos to them anyway. They are doing greatly right now. The Chinese are doing greatly, manufacturing all sort of things, technology, computers, cars, electric cars, and all of that. How did they become that great? It was because they looked onto their raw materials. They went back to their raw materials. They had to retrace themselves. They engaged in production. They engaged in manufacturing because they had the raw materials. Let's not take that away from them as well. They had the raw materials too. They had to think with their brains. They started inventory. They started inventing things. Because why? They made use of their brains. In Africa today, we do not like to be productive. We do not like to start manufacturing things. Or the things we see nowadays is on the internet. You see people, advertising forestry. You see people advertising. You see people on TikTok saying for gifters. I'm not disputing the fact that it is okay for you to demand for gifters. It is okay for you to go into whatever trading or anything you call it. It is okay for you to flow with the online or the social media trends and all of that. But we've decided to take away the production aspect of our lives. We decided to think that all that there is based on the technology aspect. What brought in the technology aspect? What ushered in the technology aspect? How did these technologies, how did they got these raw materials? Do you think that the raw materials they use in producing this technology fell from heaven? It didn't fall from heaven. It was gotten through refining of a certain raw materials. It was gotten through the refining of a certain aspect of maybe chemical mechanics, stuffs that it got. It is from this earth that it got all of these things. It is from this earth that it got all of these things. So I think for us Africans, we should start retracing our steps. There needs to be there's need for a course correction to go back, to go back and start thinking, what are the things we have on ground? How can we be able to develop these things? How can we be able to make good use of these raw materials? How can we be able to, make manufacturing possible in the African soil? And you can see you can see that Africa will become one of the greatest. My conviction is that I want to see a thriving Africa. I want to see people in Africa become, get used to their hands, like start producing things with their hands. I want to see made in Africa. I want to see made in Nigeria. I want to see made in Ghana. I want to see made in Senegal. I want to see made in Gambia. I want to see made in name it. I want to see made in all of the African countries. I want to see it. Because why? We have these raw materials, and it is only when we come together, only when we start thinking of our raw materials, knowing that these things that we see outside there in the Western world, these things that we see in these things that we see in China country, it is here also in the African world. We can make good use of these raw materials and start developing and start building ourselves. Then surely comes the true civilization that we'll ever want. Surely comes the true civilization that we yearn for. The true civilization we think that we've gotten. We've not yet gotten it. We are only flowing with the civilized nations of the Western world. We are only flowing with the things the Westerners has built. We are only flowing with the things that the Europeans have built. We are only flowing with the things that the China man has built. Then we think we've civilized, or we are civilized. We think that we are meeting up with development. No, not at all. We are not meeting up with anything. We are not meeting up at all. The true civilization will come only when the African people realize that there's the raw materials, that there are a whole lot of raw materials here that can be developed, that can be put into good use, production, manufacturing. That is when the true civilization that we all want and we all seek for, the true civilization, that is when we'll bask on it. That is when we'll become useful as Africans. Thank you.